There we go. Sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties. Did not know my microphone was not active yet. Is now though, hopefully. So, welcome to day 3 of my building of the Tamiya Zero. We are making some pretty good progress so far. So from last time, at the end of the stream, there were several paint this one part, this mix of colors, paint this one part, that mix of colors that I chose to do off stream, just because it would have been painful to add a color, clean the brush, add a color, clean the brush, add a color, clean the brush. So chose to do that off stream. So what I did there was the exhaust, which I may need to switch to manual focus for. There we go. There's the exhaust. Came out this nice color, the mixture of it was a metallic. What was the metallic color? I've forgotten. Metallic gray and red. Just a flat red. It's this kind of metallic maroon color that is kind of iconic of the Zero's exhaust. Same thing for the coolant, the cooling fins. I also painted the wheel wells. Said to use a combination of metallic blue and clear green, and I'm afraid the metallic blue just kind of overwhelmed it, but it is what it is. And then one of the parts that I have not chosen to paint on stream was the seat cushion. And I decided to leave that not part of the build. That's what I'm trying to say. Those would have been taken out and only been in the plane when they were getting ready to sortie out. So given that this is intended just to be kind of a static field display, we will leave that out. So what are we going to do today? Initially, I think what I will do is finally come back to the cockpit and do some dry brushing to highlight some of the details in the cockpit so that they are actually visible. Because right now it's all just kind of one color, so it's difficult to really see what's going on in there. So I think what I will be doing to begin with is some dry brushing on the cockpit. I also need to add the belts, the seat belts, the harness. I have an external photo etch part that I got for that I will add to the seats, but I want to make sure that I'm pretty much done with the interior before I really do any of that, due to the delicacy of those parts. I may also do some light washing, which is meaning to use a very watered down color or a dedicated wash to bring out the shadows, especially around, say, the floorboards of the aircraft, so that they stand out a little bit better as well in the final build. So that's where we'll start, and we'll kind of progress from there. It would be nice if I can get to the point that I could assemble the fuselage halves and maybe the wings and the tail surfaces so that I could let that dry really well and get a primer on there before trying to move on with the build to the next stream, because everything I built up to this point really hasn't needed a primer coat on it, so I haven't bothered with that. But the fuselage, the wings, etc., since they're joined surfaces, I really want to prime them first to make sure that there's no gap to be seen, as well as to make it a better surface for the paint to bind to. So that's kind of where we're going to go today. Most of the dry brushing I'm going to do is actually on the sidewalls. So you may recall, if you've watched some of the previous streams, we've got these components on the sidewalls. Sorry for the very slow focusing. I'm not very good at manual focusing yet. I was going the right way. Very small, also very dark, and even though there are switches there, you can't really see them. So we're going to try to highlight some of those just with a pretty simple technique. So we're going to take a dark gray. This is German gray, which is perhaps not thematically appropriate for a Japanese aircraft, but what I really just needed was a dark gray, something that's near black. We don't want these things to just really pop, really stand out. We just want them to be notably different from, or marginally different, subtly different, not notably, subtly different from their background. So this is a pretty dark gray, especially once it dries. It doesn't look that dark. Doesn't look that dark just sitting here in the jar, but it is a fairly dark color once it dries. And in order to dry brush, we don't want a lot of paint on the brush. We don't want it to like filter down into the flat surfaces. We only want to get it onto the very surface of these knobs and switches and stuff that we're going to try to highlight here. So the easiest way to do that, in my experience so far, is just get some on your brush, but then before you even really touch it to the thing you're trying to highlight, you just kind of brush some of it off onto a card or a napkin or some such thing, so that you have very, very little on the brush at that time. So I'm going to get my really super nerdy headgear on so I can actually see what I'm doing, and hopefully you can as well. So I keep working around this little star here and focus. Maybe you can see what I'm doing. So again, just getting some on the brush, getting most of it off, and then coming in and just on the surfaces of the knob and switches, just adding a little bit of contrast to the surface. It's not much. In fact, it's easy to think you've done nothing and keep adding, and then it turns out to be way too much. Because again, all these were just black. Maybe not in the real thing, maybe they had some variety to them, but at least as far as the instructions go, and since I'm not doing a detailed research background of this, my instructions tell me to paint them black, but again, you won't see anything if we leave them that way. So especially once the canopy is, or the fuselage halves are all brought together, the ambient light in there will be so moderate to none that you just won't see anything in there. So, got a series of very small buttons or switches, just trying to add some interest to them, so that, again, later on, I can remember, oh yeah, there was something there. It was kind of interesting. But we don't want to draw a lot of focus to it, like the red knobs, the red switches, the things that were called out to be specific colors. Like I say, it doesn't take much, just a little bit to draw some interest, add some depth to it, gives it a little bit of a weathered look even. So, see if I can focus on it. Not sure how well you can see it. Get closer. Just don't have a macro lens for this, so I'm afraid it's not going to work so well. In any case, we've gone over the little knobs. They've become a little bit more visually distinct from their background, and that's really all we wanted. So we continue that on the other side. There were a number of refocus. Number of cases of that on the other side as well, where we wanted to see those buttons a little bit better in the final product. So just coming in with this dark gray to do just that. If the head is not in the way, I don't think it is. Doesn't look like it. Again, a little bit goes a long way. I'm doing this detailed work where you're just trying to distinguish one thing from another. I found my general philosophy is to lean towards underdoing rather than over. That holds true for my weathering. So if you look at pictures of these things, these zeros out in historical photos, you'll often see them just looking like they've been beat to crap. For some reason, or a reason that I don't know, the Japanese paint just didn't seem to hold up well against the rigors of the combat field. Whether it was just the general wear and tear on them, I don't know, or if it was the exposure to so much salt in the air from the ocean, but you'd think they'd be used to that being an island nation. Could be that it just wasn't particularly hardy paint. I don't know. I honestly don't. Sure someone out there could tell me. But, to get to the point, I don't tend to heavily weather my models. I tend to prefer to keep it pretty simple. So even here on an aircraft that historically would have had likely a very strong amount of weathering, wear and tear, to the point that doing so here would actually be accurate. I still won't do it because it just doesn't look right to me in this scale. It makes it look fake to me, which obviously it is fake, but you don't want it to look that way. Kind of the whole point of building these is to have them somewhat accurate. So even though in reality they would look like they've been beat to shit, I don't paint mine that way. Just another good thing about this hobby, you can kind of do it the way you want to. You also might notice that I'm not really painting both of these gun receivers, for instance, the same way. I don't want them to look identical, because they wouldn't have been. But I do want just to bring out some of the detail. And that should be it for that. Another place that I want to do this is on the engine cylinders. So last time we painted this, using the rattle can. Just the bank of engine cylinders, trying to focus it. There we go. And as you can see, of course, it's mostly black. Some of it will come out silver, and I'll probably be doing some of that hand painting today, because if you remember, we painted we used the rattle can for the main color, but then we'll come back with hand painting for the silver. I'm going to put this back on autofocus and see if that helps a little bit for the moment. I want you to focus here, please. Okay. But the same thing here, there's a lot of fins and ribbing to the cylinders that will just disappear, especially once within the cowl. And we want to bring those out a little bit. So, again, we're not using a whole lot of paint. We're just trying to get a hint of the color. Not even necessarily on all the fins. Just enough to maybe draw the eye a little bit. And we unintentionally did this somewhat nicely. The rattle can paint kind of pooled in the recesses and almost did a wash for us. So it doesn't actually look like we're going to need to do much of this highlighting, just a little bit. And then obviously doing a black wash on a black paint is not going to do any good, so we won't do that. But just trying to bring out some of the details. And not doing every every cylinder head the same way, same like with the guns. Each of them would have their own level of weathering and just general wear and tear. Some of them might have been newer than others. These things could be replaced, of course. Maybe a little bit heavier on the cylinders in the back, just so that's a little easier to pick them out. That's probably good. So that's dry brushing. One of the things I forgot to note earlier for this this wheel well, because there are other parts that are supposed to be the same color, I actually mixed up my own little bottle. Autofocus just doesn't seem to want to focus anymore. Of this color, so that whenever I go to paint the other parts that are that same color, it'll be exactly the same paint mix, because it says 3 to 1, but it could be a little bit different. 3 to 1 depending on how many drops of one and the other you put in. So if I'm going to have to come back and repaint something later, the same color that I've had to mix, I prefer to mix enough that I can come back later and see what's going on there. Or not see what's going on there, but use the same mix. So that's what that was for. So I guess since we do have the engine block here, I'll let the gun receivers dry a little bit. I think we might come back and actually hand paint that flat aluminum. So again, with these metallic paints, you really got to mix them up well between each use. The pigment is just like almost like metallic flakes, little flakes of pigment that are in a liquid suspension, and so you're really gonna have to remix them every time you come to use them. So you can see the instructions. Pretty sure I had the autofocus on, but it's not cooperating with me, so apologies for my technical difficulties here. So looking at the instructions, the light areas, the white areas of these pieces need to be silver. So we will be hand painting that. I did forget, unfortunately, to spray this, so I don't have that ready for today. But since this is something that I'll add towards the end, it's not that big a deal. You'll note in the instructions it says to add it here, but I won't actually add this until the very end, because it's black. It's a different color than the rest of the build. So there's no point in doing that until later when we're ready to actually paint it, or the final assembly, I should say. So we've got a couple areas that need the silver. It is the hub of the radial engine, as well as the cylinder. I just don't know the tops of the cylinder heads, as well as some components of the parts that are going to represent the distribution harness. So I think I will start in the middle, so that way I can hold it like this and work my way around, and then actually go ahead and put this in there so I can hold this a little easier, so that I can do the tops of the cylinder heads when I'm done. So not a whole lot to say about this. We're just very carefully coming in with the silver. Our best to only get paint where it needs to be. Move forward. If I turn this, it doesn't help. Alright. Sorry. Okay, now I can hold it where I want to. Good. So I really should probably have the camera on the other side since I'm right-handed, so you can actually see what I'm doing. Because right now you can't. So lesson learned for next time, I think. I'll start putting my camera set up on the other side. Of course, then I'll learn why I don't need it over there for some other reason, but we're still learning. Streaming games, which is something else I do, is a little easier because most of the attention is on the face. Hey, Claire. But when you're actually trying to stream something like this, it's a little more complicated getting the camera angles right. I need to spend some more time thinking about that. So right now I'm just focusing on the most visible component of this engine block. I'll come back and take care of the back end as well, because while it won't be highly visible, it still will be visible, especially if you come in with like a flashlight or something, which I often do to try to show off some of the details. Trying to do this without pooling too much paint, because I found that metallics sometimes will they won't just automatically smooth out. It almost looks like you've got this little ripple in your paint if I leave too much behind. So there we have the front end. Hopefully fairly visible. And then I'll also come in from the rear of the hub to get the area between most of them. Doesn't have to be as clean, so I can do it a little heavier with the paint. You won't see the back side, but you will see how far back the silver can go. So less concerned with perfection, more concerned with, at the end of the day, what the view will be. And there are certainly some areas that, because I chose to glue these together, I won't really be able to paint without a large risk of painting something silver I don't want to be silver. However, since most of those areas will not be visible, it's just fine. I'm kind of going through and looking at what of those areas I can add some silver to, just to get as many of those angles as I can. I think that just about does it. So now we can do the tops of the cylinder heads. I'm going to clean some of the drying paint out of my brush. Also going to re-stir and get that top film off with my paint. And keep going. So now we're getting just these top surfaces. I think actually I'm going to use a different brush, because those are fairly small. I want a very small, very accurate application of paint. Now, before I do that even, I'm going to see if I can do better about this camera angle. So if you get motion sick, hold on a second, because I think if I lower the camera a little bit, I might be able to get closer. To make it easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. So apologies for the motion sickness I'm about to cause. Oh, that probably made somebody puke. Should have turned my camera off, I think, for this. There. Is that better? Is it easier to see, maybe? I think so. That's kind of hard to say. Okay, great. It's still going to be a little awkward probably, but hopefully not too bad. I'm going to put it back on manual focus because it keeps trying to change where it's looking. And I want it to focus about here. So this is where we are so far. Now we're going to go add the details to the tops of the cylinder heads. What I really need is some sort of some camera mount that allows me to do kind of a top-down. But my camera is heavy. I'm not really sure how best to do that without spending a sizable amount of money on it. I don't know that I want to do that just yet. I can't even decide what name I want to go by on Twitch and YouTube for going forward. It may not be a surprise that I can't decide if I want to spend some money. Yeah, because even with this closer camera angle, my hand is still in the way, so you still can't see what I'm doing. So I'm afraid I don't know how to address that at the moment. Maybe if I keep doing this and there's interest, I'll look into the availability of reasonably priced top-down camera mounts. Or instead of using my nice camera, I could just use my cell phone, which has a good camera. And it's obviously much lighter than a full camera. So I could more easily mount it. Excuse me. Than I could my full several pound camera. So I might try that next time. I have a monitor arm kind of set up. My gaming streaming. And it came with a horizontal arm. It's meant to hold a light if you're using the vertical component for a camera like I am. Or you could use it to hold something lighter like a cell phone out. So if I was using that as the video source, maybe that would be easier, as long as the top of my head wasn't in the way. Or maybe I need some small desktop tripod or something to just to be able to get a better angle. Because right now the camera is just sitting on a tripod next to my desk, and it's not giving you guys the best look at what I'm doing here. Or I'm getting spam calls on my phone. Apologies for that. Seems like this is taking a while, but there are 14 of these heads, and each one of them has 2 of these surfaces that need to be silver. So maybe it's not surprising. So I've almost made it back around for the forward bank of cylinders. So there we have one bank of cylinders done. And now we can move to the rear cylinders. These I'm less concerned with being perfect because these will be very difficult to see. But I need to stir my paint here. But they will not be invisible. So having that little bit of silver show up back there is still important. For too much longer, I'm going to have to figure out how to do these streams. There's not going to be a whole lot to show. So that went a lot faster because I didn't have to pay as much attention to the exact dimensions there. So there we have the engine block getting started. Now I need to do the ignition harness. So what I was saying was that at some point it's going to be difficult for me to show much. So I can prime it with the white primer that I like to use. I can show any gap filling that I need to do, which I already know that there's a little bit on the underside that I need to take care of. From where I separated the fuselages from the trees a little too roughly and took away too much plastic. So there will be some gap filling that needs to be done, and I can show that. It'll be a learning process for all of us because it's using a putty that I've not used before. But then once that's primed, filled, sanded, primed again probably, I can show the airbrushing of the body color. But the body is in two colors. The upper half is darker than the underside. And tend to paint light colors first. So I would paint the lower portion of the plane. But then I have to mask it off. And I can't mask it until what I had already painted is very dry, because sticking tape on wet paint, you can imagine well what happens. So it's one of those things where these streams are probably going to get kind of short, because it'll be do a thing, end the stream, let it dry, come back, do a stream, do a thing, end the stream, let it dry. It's going to be somewhat difficult to make that interesting, I think, because what I'll have to do, so like I said, I'll paint the underside, I'll mask it, paint the upper half, wait for all that to dry, and then I put a gloss coat on it. The gloss coat is nice because it comes out extremely smooth. assuming you painted it right. Which means that it gives you a very nice surface to put the decals on. And if you were here for my previous decal work, you know that's important because you don't want any air to be trapped under the bubbles, any air bubbles to be trapped under the decals, because they'll start causing the clear film that the decals are on to cloud up, look kind of silvery, and basically ruins the decal. There's one half of the ignition harness. So it becomes a bit of a challenge, though, because while the airbrushed paint dries really fast, it could be that I do just a couple of streams one day. One in the morning, that's the lower body paint. One in the afternoon, that's the upper body paint. But the gloss coat needs to dry for 24 hours. So my guess is what I'll do is probably show the painting of the probably the priming is what I'll do, and any filling that I have to do, which again we already know that there is some. And then I might paint the lower body off stream so that on my next stream I can demonstrate the masking process, and then paint the upper half on stream. Wait for that to dry off stream, probably do a gloss coat off stream, and then do all the decal work on the stream that follows. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Just trying to plan this out a little bit because I'm rapidly approaching the hurry up and wait part of the build. That's probably how it's going to have to happen. So I was a little sloppy in my painting, so I'm going to come back and try to No, Crows, I don't think that watching paint dry is a good content for stream. Painting, yes. Watching the paint dry, not so much. So, but you know, if you can find me some research that shows that people like to watch paint dry on Twitch, then yeah, I'm all ears. Alright, so I think what I want to do now is actually add the belts to the cockpit. So I have some belts that I got. They're just generic belts. That can be used for Japanese naval aircraft of this era. So instead of using the... Oh, yeah, sorry, I have a link filter. I had somebody spamming fake links. Yeah, sorry about that. I probably should fix that somehow. But anyway, I've got these belts that I'll use rather than the decal that the kit came with, which is not a bad decal. It's not a bad decal, but when you look in there, it'll be quite obvious that it is two-dimensional, especially since I intend to leave the canopy open. So we use these photo etch belts instead. They come in a variety of styles. For instance, I picked some up for Japanese Army and Navy aircraft at the same time because I've got some of both. And then one of the neat things about it is it actually, probably not worth focusing on this, but it has different belts depending on what you're building. So bombers were really just kind of a lap strap because you probably weren't doing a whole lot of extreme flying in a bomber. If you were probably having a worse day anyway. And then it has different belts for Mitsubishi built aircraft, including some components that come up towards the end of the war. Some Nakajima style belts and some Kawanishi style belts. Kawanishi, style belts. So what we're building, Zero was built by a number of different companies during the war. And the particular markings that we are going to use come from a Nakajima Zero, according to the paint layout that we're following. So because it's a Nakajima, there are actually some differences. So for instance, on the wing root, where the 20mm cannon are, it extends a little bit out from the wing, whereas the Mitsubishi built Zeros don't. So there are some differences depending on the company that built them that can lead to differences in the markings and the builds, and in this case, the belts. So since we're using a Nakajima paint scheme, we'll follow the Nakajima belting. This is also nice because the kit only comes with one decal variant, and which is odd because it actually gives you the option to build different variants. So it's a little short-sighted of them, I guess, or I want to say cheap. It's not really cheap. It's just they didn't provide it, but it is what it is. But anyway, we'll use accurate belts because that's how we play here, of course. So with parts like this, these photo etch parts, they are made of brass in a lot of cases, or aluminum in some cases. But in any case, they're metal, and we can't use the same glue that we've been using for our plastic parts. We actually have to use super glue for that. Now, in hindsight, it would have been easier if we had done this before adding the seat to the cockpit. But I made my life difficult. So we'll get to see how that goes. But because these parts are metal, we can't use our plastic glue. We are basically using a quick cure super glue for this. And because I autofocused or manually focused earlier, it's not going to manually autofocus anymore. So we've got to get some of these little belts appropriately positioned on the appropriate little seat. Now, the Nakajima belts are made out of a couple parts here. So it looks like it has a main strap that connects to the underside of the seat, and then the rest of it that actually kind of lays across the pilot. So just very carefully have to cut the little metal pieces that are holding the belt component down. And then for the plastic parts, we can use the X-Acto knife to get rid of any of those little plastic burrs. But we can't do that with metal. So we actually use a file that has little diamond flakes in it to file it down. You have to be careful not to bend these parts in the ways you don't want them, because they can be very difficult to get appropriately bent back into shape. So you can see my thumb very well, but the kind of give you the scale of the part I'm working with here. It's quite small. So for those who don't know, this is the Zero is being built in 1/48th scale. So 1 inch on the model is 48 inches on what would have been the real thing. This, more than anything, is what dulls down these X-Acto knives that I use. So those two small parts will make up one side of the belt. This is a very delicate piece. Instead of using the file, I use the X-Acto knife to flatten out the burr that remains. There we go. And now we want that to sit on this piece. So we have our super glue. And it doesn't take much. Pardon me while I hold my breath here. Whew. Tiny, tiny parts. So I'm actually going to take a little bit more of the super glue and dab it along the side a little bit. Rely a little bit on some capillary action to draw it under that piece, because I'm going to be having to bend it and shape it. I don't want the piece to pop off that I just glued down. So we'll let that sit for a moment, because we also have to do the other side. At least I can use the diamond file on. It's a little thicker, so I'm not worried about it flexing and warping too much. I used to think these parts were kind of lazy because they come pre-detailed. When I first started making belts like this, I actually made them. I would have the little buckle at the end. I would cut pieces of tape to the right length. And paint them and do all that. And they look fine. But then I decided that I was stressing over detail. It didn't really matter that much, and I just decided to buy them instead. Some companies even make them, if you're buying it for a specific kit. So these are generic. These would work in any Japanese aircraft with appropriate type. But if you're buying one, say, for a specific kit, I buy this set for the Tamiya Zero. They can actually be bent to shape for you already. Which should be nice, I would think. So we will clean this part up. Came off the tree. Actually, it came off pretty darn clean, so I'm not going to bother it anymore. Instead, I'll go ahead and get it held in the right orientation on a tweezer. Put some glue down and drop it in place. That's too much glue. Glues down. And drop the part in place. Scooch it over a little bit because I didn't quite get it perfect. And there we are. The two halves of the seatbelt are now done. And the only thing that remains is the fun part of getting them into the right shape. So I was a little ahead of myself in putting this small instruction away. I need to see which side goes which. So it looks like this is on the left and this one is on the right. So now comes the fun part. of trying to get these in the right spot and bent into the right shape. So we're just kind of trying to get a general idea of how these fit in there. This would have been a pretty stiff piece of leather or some such material, so it doesn't need to perfectly flow over the seat edge. But we do need enough surface for it to glue down on the side, and then we can bend it to shape. So in order to do this, I actually have a particular pair of pliers that are meant to bend photo etch. We're kind of taking a ballpark guess of the bends there. Start off with. One of the advantages of tape, or you can actually get fabric belts now even, is they are flexible. So you can get them in the right spot a little easier and even make them look a little bit more natural. In something this scale, I don't find it to be particularly necessary, but it is nice. It's difficult to get this to lay down in a realistic fashion. I think that will do. So there's one belt. It's not glued down yet, just kind of in shape. And it's nice because, well, there's not a whole lot of surface to it or anything. I mean, it's not a large component. There's only one piece of many of that interior. It has shadow to it, so it adds some level of interest to the inside of the cockpit. Better than what the bare seat could have done, or the plain decal would have done either. Happy to answer questions if either of you guys are still there and have any. Otherwise, I'll just keep spouting random stuff. So, what will this look like once I have the two parts in and glued down, hopefully? Let's see. I can stop dropping parts. Okay, I need to twist that part some more. It's not doing what I want it to do. So, when we are done, oops, sorry, that's been out of focus the whole time. It should look something like that at the end of the day, ideally. So it gives a nice approximation of what the belts would have looked like. So, just gonna glue it down. Incorporating. I'd actually have to use a slower drying super glue. Oh, there we go. He says as he gets the seat belt where he wants it. All right. Apparently I just had to complain about it. Sorry guys, out of focus. Put that autofocus back on. See if that helps. Some days it seems to do better than others. Alright. Same thing, other side. Well, that one went on a lot better. There we have it. So you know my autofocus isn't autofocusing. Belts are in. Seems like it does not like me switching from auto to manual quite so easily. So I need to work on that. Didn't know how the manual was going to do this time. I noticed when I was looking back at some of my streams, they were a little hard to see. So I thought maybe using some manual focus might help, but I'm not so sure. Learning process. So, looking at the instructions, we still need to add, now that we have the belts in, we can go back and add the preceding end of the nose mount armament. So we will do that now. So this will go in like so. And it fits nicely, so don't need to worry about too much. So we'll go ahead and add some glue. We're going to come back and touch up the back end of that a little bit. Glue that in place. And the other side. And focus again. There we go. Put those on there nice and parallel. Now we can come back just a little bit of black paint to take care of where we cut it off the back of the tree. And that just about concludes the cockpit build. So, another thing I need to kind of determine is the cowl lengths. We'll actually take a step back and we'll get back to that. Let's look at the engine and its ignition harness. See if we can get that taken care of. So, '64 is the top half of this. And it goes on like that. Oh, that goes on nicely. One thing I like about this particular company, to me, I mean, their manufacturing is just perfect. Very rarely are there any issues stemming from their build. Doesn't mean you didn't screw something up, but from a engineering standpoint, it's always very well done. That adds some nice contrast under the end, in front of the cylinder heads. We'll do the same thing on the other side. That does it. So, like I said earlier, unfortunately, I did not remove or paint the front part of the engine. So I'll probably have to do that separately, off stream. But one of the things I need to figure out is whether I want the open or closed cowl back. I'm thinking closed, because again, we're doing this as a static build, sitting on the tarmac, landing field, whatever. But not really having the intention of really needing anything behind it. So I have the difference here between the open and closed flaps of the engine cowl. Kind of hard to see. But because I'm not going to have anything back there, I think I'm just going to use the closed and just be done with it. So, executive decision made. Which allows us to do a few things. It allows us to go ahead and mount the exhaust here. If I can keep from throwing them around the room. So that was 14. Right side. Like so. There. And the other side. It's in there very nicely. Good, so there are the exhausts behind the cowlings. We'll add this little guy. It's allows the cylinders to be mounted to the cowl of your choice. I guess they did this to minimize plastic waste. Almost doesn't even need glue. Very tight fit. But we will go ahead and glue it anyway. And then to that we can add, can we add that yet? Yes we can. We can add the engine, cylinder housings. And that's most of the engine. So again, I still need to paint this piece here. So it's not painted yet, but just so the idea of what you can actually see in the end. It's just this. So you can see why I didn't put a whole lot of effort into really super detailing it, even with a flashlight. Not a whole lot in there that you can see. A little easier to see in person with said flashlight, but there's just not a whole lot going on in there. So that's why I didn't spend much time with that. And then on the other end, once we've got our halves together, we'll eventually be mounting this on the front there. And because I'm not doing anything behind the exhaust or anything, having those cylinder flaps open would have made it a whole lot easier to see in there, and there's just nothing to be seen. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have used the open cowlings in this case. So that's why I went with the closed cowlings for the engine. Because I'm not spending the time to super detail that. So once I paint that, I can add that, I can glue it into the nacelle, be done with that, and set it apart until pretty much the very end of the build, because at that point I can mate the engine cowl to the body. So next is one of the harder parts, actually assembling the fuselage halves together. Always a bit of a stressful process. But we will give it a shot and hope for the best. So we have this piece here, this little stability for the nose section. I'll go ahead and tack it down on one side. Right, there was something we needed to remove. We needed to remove this. From each half. Good news is I don't have to try to line up the fuselage halves and the cockpit and everything simultaneously. The cockpit insert comes in from the underside after the two halves are appropriately joined. So not something I'd have to worry about right now. So something to check before I do all of this is if I have any clothespins that are wide enough to pinch some of these parts together. Looks like I can probably get one on the tail. Yeah, so I'll be able to do that for the tail. There's not a lot of surface to do so in the front, so I might not be able to do that. Man, it just isn't my day for focus. So the goal here is to minimize as much as possible any gaps and any lips on this edge between the two parts. And if that sounds stressful, that's because it is. I'm actually going to use this quick set and see if I can get just this first part nice and level. Probably going to have to do some sanding of the seam, but it's okay. Good news is it doesn't look like a lot of that's going to be necessary for the section just after the canopy. Apologies, probably not going to be talking much here. I need to kind of really pay attention to what I'm doing. The better I do this now, the less pain later. So it does feel like I've got a little bit of a uneven edge here. I'll have to come back with some sanding pads, but overall not too bad. Definitely had worse joints. So I won't be overly upset by that one. But we'll let it dry for a moment, and then we might go ahead and take care of it. While that's drying, we can move to wings. So we start with the bottom wing. Being very careful about how much plastic I remove from the wing edges. I realized that I've been a dummy and probably could have just had this at a higher f-stop and made the whole thing in focus. So, of course, you can make fun of me later for that, if you're still around. But that was a dummy thing to do. Magenta, I won't say that I've never found my fingers glued together. Thankfully not so much that I ever had to seek professional assistance in having them separated. But it's definitely happened. Hopefully I didn't respond too slowly to you there. I was trying to put those fuselage pieces together, and it's a very stressful time for me. Appreciate your understanding at this difficult moment in my life. And then clean those spots up from the inside. Yeah, that's kind of what you end up having to do. Alright, so there is bottom wing cleaned up. And since we're doing a particular marking scheme, there's actually differences between the Mitsubishi and the Nakajima Zeros. So we have to appropriately select the component there. So we need E10 and E11. Get E10 over here. E11. Oops, on the floor apparently. Luckily, most of the glue that I use, magenta, only glues plastics together. So, since I'm not made of plastic, it's relatively reasonable to assume that I won't become glued together. Now, when I'm super gluing things together, of course, then it's another matter. This is a neat way to allow the builder to build a couple different versions by making most of the wing, which is the same, one piece, but then adding these little inserts so that if you're building a particular kit or a particular version, you can do so without having to mold two complete wings. And they're so good at their engineering that they can do that without fear of them fitting poorly. I mean, they fit in there as if they were part of the wing to begin with. Can't even really tell that they were not. So it's great. Saves a little plastic and environment. And then we have these little holes that we need to drill out. Oh, this is my newer set. I'm still using my older set first. I think I guessed that just right. So I have these tiny drill bits. So I can drill out holes for various components down the line. Oh, bitrate's too high. So were you able to turn it down on your end? Or I wonder if, so this is on a different, this is on my old laptop that I'm using for this purpose. I wonder if I didn't set it up the same. So this may actually be a case where I'm not using my gaming desktop for this. I'm using my old laptop, and I downloaded Streamlabs on it, but I didn't really go through a lot of the setup process like I did for the desktop. So it might be that I'm actually streaming at a lower bit rate here than I am on my gaming PC. So that again probably tells me that I might need to reduce that. Yeah, it's probably not something that you would do. It's something that I probably need to do on my gaming PC. So it's the lower wing, lower half of the wing. That's probably true for most people's internet magenta, so it's probably something I need to adjust. Would that be better? I suppose. Just more expensive. It's just too bad we haven't figured out truly high-speed global internet. 8 and 9. Eight goes there. Nine goes here. So now we're just kind of cleaning up the pieces to join the wing halves together, and then we can join those to the fuselage halves. I'm kind of tempted to just go ahead and, well, I can't join the fuselage halves together until I add the cockpit into the top half, and I'd kind of like to sand the top half down before I do that, but I also don't like sanding in the building and then sanding in the building. I'd rather get all the sanding done at once if I can. So we'll see how I feel when I get there in a minute. Oh, I almost didn't notice I need to remove these little spacers. Where the gun mounts will poke out. So now we're getting the appropriate panels in based on the particular markings we chose. Taking a look at the instructions. I almost forgot something. Would have been bad. I've never seen this done this way, but this particular kit, you can add the drop tank, the fuel tank that they would have used to extend their range, but would have literally dropped it when they engaged the enemy, so that they would not be slowed down. They're obviously not exactly aerodynamic. This particular kit has a little rubber insert into which the drop tank will kind of sit in. So it's actually something that you could add or remove as the desire strikes you. I think it's kind of neat. Would have been something fun to have as a kid, because then I could have taken it off, put it back on as a kid. Not doing that so much these days. Actually playing with them like that. The wing components snap together nicely. Should make it a little less painful to put these together than fuselage halves. Yeah, that goes together nicely. Again, that Tamiya engineering is just very, very good. Let's use that. That was the point where I looked back at the instructions and realized I forgot something, but I actually think I don't have that problem this time, which is nice. So I'm not quite ready to do this yet because, again, I need to actually insert the cockpit. Just kind of test fitting to see. This is something I'd read about. One of the only places that this kit seems to have problems here. It doesn't sit quite flushly. Maybe hear that? So I need to be careful about how I set that down. It's one area I'll need to sand, so again, since I like to sand and fill and all that all at the same time, I might just go ahead and do that all at once later. What I'm kind of hoping for is to get here in short order most of the build done regarding the fuselage and the wings and whatnot. I may end up doing some of the sanding off camera. It's not exactly a thrilling thing to watch. Let's see. I think I will put those side panels on first. Where did they go? Here. That was 7. 7 goes on the right. Not like that. If I had $1 for every time I drop a part, I'd have a couple dollars. So I'm trying to figure out why this is not seeming to fit on very well, because later this will be difficult to add. It doesn't fit on there very well. I don't know why it seems to be having an issue. There's no way I'm going to be able to provide as much pressure later. So it does snap in place. Guess we'll have to see what happens when that happens. I'll go ahead and insert the cockpit now, I think. Something doesn't feel right. It's better. Oh, and the camera just died because I forgot to plug it in. But I think that's actually a good enough place to stop the stream for now. I may do a little bit more assembly off stream, but nothing that's too crazy. So I'm gonna cut the stream there. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.